Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we have Dina Merriam, and she's talking about your book. Please hold up your book, Dina.
My book.
My Journey Through Time, a spiritual memoir of life, death, and rebirth. That's a pretty big subtitle. Life, death, and rebirth. Those are hitting all the topics, and so we're going to be talking about life, death, and rebirth. So welcome, Dina.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So we started off talking about your work in the human unity movement, and you've had a lot of different things that you're doing. This very incredible bio where you have been working in the interfaith movement since 1990s. You're the vice chair of the Millennium World Peace Summit of Religion and Spiritual Leaders held at the UN, which we were just talking about. And you said that all these things have kind of, it seems like you were in the flow and alignment and they've just have kind of emerged.
Exactly. I am as surprised as anybody else that I never thought I would find myself organizing peace conferences around the world
Hmm.
or organizing sessions on climate change at the UN climate summits. It's when I look back into my past, I see it's the culmination of many efforts in the past. And I think that's the way it is for everybody. What we're doing is not just suddenly the work appears to us. These are aspirations, desires, efforts that we've made in the past that suddenly the conditions are right and suddenly the work comes to fruition.
So this is stuff that, and I know that you have lots of different stories about your past lives, that you're saying that these things happened as a continuation of past lives and that are now continuing into your future. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about what your past lives were, how you found out about them, and how they connect now to your future
Well, I'll,
or
I'll start with
current.
I'll start with the story, which is before I got into the interfaith movement, into the peace work. I had found my guru, my teacher, when I was 20. I was in college on a spiritual search. Somebody handed me his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and recognized immediately that this was my path. But he was no longer in the body,
Mm,
and so there was a great sorrow for me. A lot of my friends were running off to India, finding their gurus, but
mm.
mine was not here on earth. So I had to go inside to find him, and I studied his teachings and took very seriously his meditation teaching. And he encouraged not just 15-minute meditations to relax yourself, but very deep meditations, long, deep meditations. So that became my practice. And I was a divorced mother raising two kids, working at a job, and keeping my life together, basically, doing my meditation, studying holy texts. I'd had an interest in finding the common ground between all religions, so I did a lot of studying. I got my master's at Columbia on sacred text, and so I was intrigued the fact that I felt they were all pointing in the same direction.
Mm, mm. And
Uh, and
what the direction did you see them all pointing towards?
toward a unity with the universe, really, whatever you call that. Some may
Hmm.
call that God, others call it Brahman. There are different names for that ultimate consciousness, which we seek to know and to be part of.
Hmm.
And I found little bits, hints of reincarnation and Hasidic texts and mystical Christian texts. I had always had a belief in it, but for me, it was just a belief. When I was younger, I would have kind of dreams of other places,
Hmm.
uh, and strong interests in things like ballet. As a child, I was obsessed with ballet. I would dance in my dreams. When the ballet came to town, my mother would take me every night. And then when I started meditating seriously, I started working at my father's company as a writer. um, I, I started having a series of dreams. It started with dreams.
Mm,
I had
mm,
I was married at the time, moved into a home, and there was a beautiful home that I had seen, and I wanted that house. As soon as I moved in, I began to dream of another house, and it
mm,
always left me with a sense of yearning, of sadness and yearning, and it was
mm,
always the same place.
mm,
I was almost haunted by this dream. And I didn't know what it was. I just didn't know what it was. I talk about it in the book how there were triggers, things from the current house where I'm actually seated now that triggered memories, and so then these dreams would start. But about 10 years later, I was working at my father's company as a writer, and he had hired a consultant. And this man, as soon as I met him, he started speaking to me in Russian. And
Wow.
and he started calling me a Russian affectionate name. And I was very baffled by that. And things, one day I woke up with a dream, which was kind of, half asleep, half awake, that in between
Mm,
world, where I saw myself as a child in Russia. I saw myself as a child.
mm.
And then I was clearly in another time period. It looked like turn of the century, early 1900s. And I heard a voice that said, "You've always wanted to know who you were. This is you." And I said, "Where am I?" And the voice said, "Russia."
Wow.
And then a series of memories began to come back to me of a
Ah, okay.
mother.
So let me make sure I understand this correctly. So, and I want there are a bunch of questions that came on from listeners that are listening and responding to us and hearing your life experience. And so, you Yogananda, who I think is the autobiography of a yogi, the book that you read, and unfortunately who is gone. So you're connecting with his spirit, even though he had been passed. And so were
Right.
you having like kind of a conversation with him or kind of a
Oh,
dialogue with him?
many conversations with him. And
Ah, okay.
I have dreams of him. I had dreams of him. Um,
Okay.
eh, so I felt a deep connection with him
Hmm.
from early on. And so I had this sadness of not being able to be with him in the body, and yet knowing that I was also very deeply connected with him.
Ah, okay. So do you feel like you had a past life with him too?
Well, this is what my past life showed me was that I did meet him in my previous birth.
Ah.
And friends of mine would say, "Oh, this guru's in town, go see him." And on occasion I would go and then just run out and say, "No, he's not the one for me."
Ah, interesting. Because so you actually somehow there's a part of you that recognized when you saw in Yogananda, you're like, "Yep, that's the guy who I felt in my past life, and I'm going to
He
continue
was.
in this
And
life."
yeah, such a deep, intimate, immediate connection. And so when I remembered, Yogananda returned to India once after he came here in 1920. He passed through Germany. He tried to see Hitler. He said that if he could see Hitler, just the vibrations that he could send him could change the course of history.
Wow.
So this was in 1935, and in my recollections, I was born in Russia, sent out as a 14-year-old child during the revolution by my parents. I never saw them again. They died in Russia. And I was in Germany in 1935 and met Yogananda there. A very brief meeting, but that's where the connection
Oh.
was made.
Wait, and you found this through because and there were some other questions of saying, wait, did you dream? So do you feel like in the dream world that's where you connected to Yogananda, or was it happening through your meditation through kind of a channeled conversation that you were talking to Yogananda?
I think that it was my spirit calling out to him that he was trying to reach me in as many ways possible. So often it comes through dreams. We're more open in dreams.
Right.
I've had some of my deepest spiritual experiences it's not exactly a dream state. It's like that state when you're just before you wake up. It,
Mm-hmm.
there's a period where you're coming out of your deep dream state and you're
Mm.
coming back into outer awareness. And that's often where you're very open to spiritual messages.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had many experiences in that state.
So you're
And
conscious enough to recall like the details in Russia. My parents were not alive. I had left them. I saw Yogananda. So you have enough recollection because you're kind of in that in between awake and sleep state.
then the narrative actually came to me mostly through meditation. So
Mm,
I would sit in meditation and suddenly find myself be drawn like a vacuum sucked inside
mm.
and suddenly be in the middle of a movie. I'd be seeing scenes, I'd be hearing conversations, and I knew who I was because it was seeing it through one of the character's eyes. She was,
Wow.
it was, so I was seeing it through her eyes. And then I saw these scenes just kind of passing before my inner eye. And I often keep a notepad by my side when I meditate because many things come to me that way.
Mm. And I want to go back to the thing that you were talking about too, and you were saying that you were at Columbia studying sacred texts. And one of the things that you learned about was reincarnation. So, what do the various sacred texts say about reincarnation that helped you open your mind to this, right? Because it's a concept that not everyone believes in necessarily.
From an early age, it always made sense to me. I always had a sense that, well, I didn't just come out of nothing. I didn't just, sperm and egg come together and suddenly you're there.
Right. I want to watch ballet every, every weekend.
I mean, I always felt that
Yeah.
I had an existence before that, but I had no memory of it. And I can understand. I mean, if you don't have a memory of it, then it's just a belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not an experience. And so it's a belief. Either you believe it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had many people ask me, what do you say to people who don't believe in reincarnation? I say, well, if you haven't had the experience, the memory, it's understandable. I mean, you either, you can believe in things or not, but once you've had the experience, I went through a lot of questioning actually of my early experiences. When I started to see these movies of Russia, I said to myself, okay, maybe you're meditating too much. You're going off into the deep end. And then I said to myself, check myself. I'm a single mom raising two teenage boys,
Yeah, get
hold
it
a good
together.
I hold a good job. I manage my household really well. I'm not, off on Mars or anything. Because people have experiences in meditation, they do. I mean, people have there's a breadth of experiences. And so I checked myself, and actually I went as far as to take a plane to some of these places that I had seen.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so let me make sure and let me go back a little bit because I want to hear more about that. So your father hires a consultant from Russia. He speaks Russian too, and are and you're like what? And then you have a dream that in fact you do have an experience with Russia. So do you think that that gentleman kind of triggered the Russian and
No question.
okay, so he kind of
It was meeting
triggered this.
him that
Oh,
he triggered, and this happened to me throughout my life actually, where I'd meet somebody and it would trigger a memory of a previous birth. And in the
oh.
book, I go back to 7 or 8 different lifetimes where I have complete narratives and you can see them together. It's like different chapters. I don't even look at it as different lifetimes. It's different chapters in one book,
Wow. Okay, so
different
you
episodes,
you meet this Russian guy. You end up going to Russia. And what was your goal when you went to Russia? To fact check? Like, am I crazy? Is this real? What happens? Okay. So what'd you find?
Well, first, before I went to Russia, I went to Prague because that's where I lived at the end of my life, in the like 1940, and I had a very vivid scene of seeing the Nazis march down a boulevard, coming
Mm.
from the right. I was standing, and my brother was living there. And I went to live with him, and looking, peering out, and seeing the Nazis march down, and I had vivid memories of my end days there.
Mm.
And so I just went to Prague and I walked the streets and I found that boulevard. And then I found out
Wow.
that that was where the Nazis did enter Prague.
Yeah.
And I matched the dates that I saw, and it just evoked a lot of sadness in me.
Mm.
But I was on this journey. I mean, I was something of a detective, really,
Yeah.
trying to confirm. And I had seen many things. Things that I did not know. For example, the man who awakened the memories, the consultant in my father's firm, he was a very, very mysterious but knowledgeable man. And at one point, I saw that I had gotten involved with a professor from the University of Heidelberg. I never heard of that place.
Hmm.
So I went to him the next day and said, is there such a place as the University of Heidelberg in Germany? He said, oh, a very famous and very old university. So I asked him other things that I had seen
Mm.
about that time period, and he confirmed everything to me.
Wow.
Uh, and so after a certain point, I said to myself, okay, this is real. this is real. And then I went to Russia to look for the house that my memories of Russia were not as clear as of Prague because I was a child. But I found the ballet school that I had been part of, and I found neighborhoods that looked like the neighborhood where I had lived. St. Petersburg, when I went there 20 years ago, was very depressed because the Soviet Union had just fallen. So it was poor. And I remembered a very glittering city. So I did this the first time around.
You can't do it for all 7 memories, probably. You're like, I'll be traveling for the rest of my life. Valid fact checking.
Globetrotting around the world. And then it took me a while to accept everything I was seeing. But when I thought about it, it made a lot of sense. Because not only was I completely obsessed with Russian ballet as a child, and even though I did not go to ballet class, I didn't train, I would close my door, I had some toe shoes, and I put on music and I would just dance as an 8-year-old child. But when I got to be a teen, I was obsessed with Russian literature. I read everything. And so clearly the connection, and I've seen this in my own kids, that children carry with them a great deal from their previous birth. And then by the time they reach the teen years, they're really finished a lot of that, and they're moving on to what's going to be their work in this world. But sometimes they can go through, several lives can come together. It's not exactly linear. So I have a lot of elements in me. A friend of mine who read this book said to me, Dina, I recognize you in every life. Because there are traits that I recognize in myself that I can say, oh, I got that from there. I got that from there. And there are things that you remain. It's very interesting to study, really, how this process works, which is really what I hoped in sharing the book. It's not so much about a curiosity about reincarnation. It's really about the process of karma or law of cause and effect. Just like I was asked recently, what about people who don't believe in karma? And I responded, well, gravity existed before Newton. It's not like suddenly gravity became a law when Newton declared it to be a law.
Right. Okay, so I have a question. You said that in the book you have 7 different lifetimes. How many lifetimes have you tracked over the course of? Because I assume that you're gathering lots and lots of lifetimes. Are they
ongoing? It's almost finished a second book, which goes back earlier in time, where there are 2 lifetimes, and they came to me as I went on a very sacred pilgrimage in India, and I saw myself back in ancient India, and so I'm writing about that. It's a different story, but these are the lives that I had full narratives of. This the story that relates to my current life, and that were sequential, so to speak. Back in the previous one, born in the early 19th century.
I see. Okay, so you can actually say these are, let's say that you've had 50 past lives. Either it's the last 7 most recent sequentially from one after another. Right. Oh, that's fascinating. And did you get them in sequential order, or how did you receive it? And there was a question from a listener going, well, how did she do this? And I know that you said you were doing a meditation and connecting with Yogananda, and that the dreams, you were asking for Yogananda's help in that. So if someone is this something that someone could replicate? And if so, how would you describe what they would have to do?
I really don't know the answer to that. I don't know how this came to me. What I say is that everybody has a different experience in meditation. Some people see auras. Some people, see light, go into the light. Some people go into other realms. This is, and I used to say, God, I don't see any lights when I meditate. Some people see a third eye star, they go through it and they're in another place. It's never happened to me.
Yeah.
And so, that's one of the reasons we're kind of encouraged not to share our experiences so people don't say, well, that never happened to
Yeah,
me.
why am I not seeing my past lives? And Dina
Right.
is.
I think that one of the reasons I decided to share is because I think that there's a reason that this came to me, and it's to share with other people, even if you don't see the details of your life. It doesn't matter really that much. I mean, the main thing to do is to focus on this life, right? And
Right.
it can be a distraction. I've had friends come up to me really with curiosity and, who do you think I was? And it's like, that's not the point. We've all had such a variety of experiences in terms of being wealthy and poor and married and not married. Such a wealth of experiences that at the end of the day, you say, well, God, there's nothing more to want. I've had it all, you know?
Mm-hmm. So what were your last? So when you actually look at the last seven, can you give us a quick snapshot of those seven and then how you knit together the themes that you saw and how it affects your current life?
So one of the questions that I asked, because every time I saw something, it raised more questions,
Mm-hmm.
was why was I born in Russia? I always assumed, oh yes, I believe in reincarnation. I clearly was in India. My last birth must have been in India,
Mm-hmm.
because I have such deep ties to my guru and to the whole culture there. And so I said, why was I born in Russia? And that I sat with that for a long time. And then uh, about a few years later, after I had this recall, again I met somebody um, uh, uh, who we shared. He was also a devotee of Yogananda, and he just lost his wife, and he talked about his wife, and I immediately felt so connected to her. And then I began to see my life previous to the Russian life, which was a life in the American South. And I saw it was pre-Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw a lot of things about that time. I saw my desire again for, well, in that life it was for education for girls.
Mm-hmm.
Education was very poor for girls. It was about etiquette, a posture and how to serve tea. And I was from a French family and had been to Europe and wanted to bring the higher education, intellectual education, to girls. And so that was the theme that had been with me for a number of lives, of trying to empower women, to give women the resources they need to fill their potential. But it was in that life that I met and someone from Russia who I never married, but the connection was there, and the aspiration to be with that man who I couldn't be with, it came in that life, and that's what drew me to take birth in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But then I said to myself, why was I born in the American South? I've always had a real hesitation about the South. I was part of the civil rights movement, and I couldn't see myself in the American
Mm-hmm.
South. Um, and then I recalled I was doing a project with the UN in Africa and West Africa, and we were invited after the project to go to where the uh, Africans who were captured to be sent on ships were held, and everybody went, and I couldn't go. And then I began to recall my life in Africa, which was just previous to the life in the American South.
Oh, wow. So you're a slave.
And I wasn't captured. I was lived in an African village, and there I had a woman shaman teacher. Let me just
Oh.
take this phone off the hook. I had a woman shaman teacher, and she she was to me everything, but again, a very mysterious woman. And when there was a raid on our village, and I was killed, and my son was captured and brought to America,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I took birth in America, to find him.
Ah, I see. I see. So in some ways, your past, just like the Russian, fell in love with a Russian man, came and reincarnated as a ballet dancer in Russia. It's because there's something about the past life that leads you to being curious about being in the South or being. Do you think that was to be reincarnated in the South at the same time as your son was born because you had died? Do you think, like, did you get details that Because I often wonder, like, when you get reborn, do you get flipped around really quickly or do you
It
die insane?
depends. It
Yeah.
it, it, it depends on when the conditions are right.
Mm.
You know, I was a young woman when I was killed in that raid. My son must have been not more than 10, was taken. I did meet him later in life, but I didn't know it. It was only as I look back now, I can see that I was able to. He was a freed slave, and he helped with the um, underground movement. And I
Mm.
was able to, not knowing who he was, I mean, just a man that I admired, was able to give him the proceeds from a school I'd started to help with the underground movement. So, I mean, there's a lot of linkages in the story.
Mm.
I,
Interesting. Okay. So, and then when you've looked, so one, I'm hearing the linkages from one life to another, these seven sequential lifetimes. It's just kind of a curiosity that leads you from Russia to to another place. And so,
or say, from Africa to the American South to Russia.
right. Okay. Yeah. So it's those
So,
kind of like there is a reason because it's like you're saying like why was I in Russia, so you can kind of understand how the progression occurred. That's fascinating. I never thought about the sequencing and that they would be dealing to be with other people that you were with before you died and hoping that you'll kind of catch them on the second life, next life. That's
and you don't know
fascinating.
what relationship will be. I mean, in that in the American South, I was able to help him fulfill his mission by funneling money to him and by seeing that he had become a very noble character.
Wait. Yeah.
You know, I mean, he had probably this was another incarnation of his. This wasn't the child. He
Yeah.
had probably been a slave. Maybe he died. Who knows? Reborn, and then he became this noble character. So it's like we come back and we bring things to completion without being conscious of it. These things happen without us being deep in our soul. Our soul knows, but our conscious.
So let me ask, do you feel, and because I don't know the full Russian story, so you left to go to Russia to be with this gentleman who you'd fallen in love with, and do you feel like in that, when you were reborn in that Russian life, that you were together with that man and finally like able to complete the story?
He was the man who became a consultant at my father's firm.
Holy crap. Wow.
I mean,
So when you saw this gentleman and you finally put all this stuff together, did
well,
you
I'll tell
say to
you,
him like, "Hey, honey," like what did you do?
there's a missing piece to this. That
Yeah.
Russian man, who had been a wealthy man, would send money to me to help me set up the school for girls in the South. We communicated, you know, I met him in Europe, came back to the American South, set up the school for girls, struggled for funds. He sent me money. And so he helped me fulfill that intention of mine.
Wait, this Russian consultant that worked for your dad would send you money.
Well, he was at that time a Russian, he was a Russian man in the 19th century. Don't
Oh,
forget,
wait, but I thought that this guy worked for, like
yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
consensus reality, he worked for your.
But he wasn't Russian in this birth. He was actually African American.
Wait, now I'm getting confused. This is just like that movie. What is that fantastic movie where all the
Okay,
characters change? Sometimes they're Japanese and then they come back there.
let me just make it very simple.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm born
try
in the
again.
American South. I meet a Russian man,
Okay.
a wealthy Russian man. We fall in love, but I go back to America.
Mm-hmm.
We communicate by mail. He sends me money and I can open this girls' school and I die in America, right?
Okay.
But have this aspiration of what would have been like to live in Russia.
Right.
I get born in Russia. He gets born in Russia,
Okay.
but he's a Russian Jew
Mm-hmm.
and he's a scientist. He leaves and becomes a professor at Heidelberg University.
Oh.
I meet him again in Europe way after I leave Russia, and we have an affair. He's trying to get the Jews out of Germany. I have money from my family's jewels that I smuggled out of Russia with me. I give him the money now to help him get the Jews out of Germany. So where he had helped me in a previous birth to start my girls' school, I'm helping him now fulfill his mission to get these Jewish professors out of Germany.
Okay.
We both die.
Okay.
I'm born in America because my aspiration is to come to America to study with my teacher. So my aspiration leads me to take birth in America.
Oh wait.
He's also,
Oh wait. Sorry. How did Yogananda get factored into the story?
well, I meet Yogananda in my previous birth, and then at the end of my life, he says, I'm coming to take you to America.
Ah, okay, got it. All right, so that's how you're like, okay, I'm America now, from Russian
Yeah.
America. Okay, I'm
Okay, and
tracking.
then I wait and wait for him, and then I finally die, and there he is, and he says, "I've come to take you to America." I get born in America. Then I meet this same guy who's now an African American businessman in New York, and he starts speaking to me in Russian, awakening, and I get confused, and I say to myself, "Wait, I'm attracted to this man. Are we going to have a relationship? I'm
Hmm.
divorced. He's divorced. What is this about?" But what it's about is the awakening of my memories, because as soon as the memories are returned, our karma is done now. He's helped me start a girls' school. I've helped him get the German Jews out of Germany. Our karma is finished. No relationship develops. As soon as the memories return, he leaves the firm and moves on to something else, and I don't see him again. The karma is done.
Wow. So, wow. Okay, so based on your understanding about karma, how does this fit within the sacred texts and their description of karma?
Well, the sacred texts say that every action has a reaction. So everything that you do will reap you reap what you sow. Will reap a fruit. It could be a positive fruit. It could be a negative fruit. If you harm somebody, somehow that's going to come back to you. You don't know in which way, and often you don't make the circuits don't connect. If you help somebody, well, that's going to also come back to you in some way. Most often, it could be in the same lifetime. It could be 3 lifetimes down the road, and you wouldn't connect it except on a deep level, your soul would recognize, aha, this is the result of that action that I did.
I see. So this karma, like, okay, I helped you start the girls' school. I helped these professors get out of Germany. So your karma was done. Then you come to the United States. This man is now an African American man, and he triggers the memories, but you've already completed a cycle. So there's this kind of cyclic, and based on your knowledge of the sacred text, does it always happen this way where it's like cause, effect, completion, you're done? Because my understanding about karma is that you actually have some, I may have a karmic pattern that I have lifetime after lifetime that I must resolve. So that's kind of a over and over and over and over. The idea that you present is kind of a cycle of like, I help you, I help you. Great, we're done. I
Well,
harmed you. We're done.
you
Like,
know, well, that particular relationship may be done.
hmm.
It could have not been done. I could have had an affair with him. It could have ended in a bad way.
Wait.
And then there could have been more stuff to work out in the future. In that particular case, it felt very much like, we've done things for each other. It's clear now.
Right.
But yes, there are karmic patterns that we tend to repeat. I mean, I have a situation where you could see in one life, which is rare. One of my dearest friends ran off when she was 30 with her husband's best friend.
Hmm.
And her husband was devastated and he suffered so much. And she went off with his best friend, married him. And then 20 years later, he ran off with her best friend.
Right.
And I said to her, my God, like rarely do you get to see that karmic return in such a short time period. It could have
Mm.
been, you're happy with this man, you die, next life your husband leaves you,
Right.
and you don't know why.
Right.
But the fact that it was a best friend and a best friend, it was such a clear mirror thing of what had happened. And at that point, she got very close to her first husband and said, my God, I had no idea what I put him through. Because he was suffering not only the loss of a wife, the loss of a best friend, and that his best friend would have done this to him. And that's what her
Mm.
suffering. This woman
Mm.
was best
Are you
friend.
saying, wait, this friend of yours, this happened in one lifetime or two separate lifetimes?
One life, 20 years,
I see, within 20 years of her own lifetime. So you're saying sometimes a karmic thing is like within a year's period.
immediate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's most often I think it's not.
Right.
Uh, but that was such a clear example to me of, you learned your lesson. You should be grateful. You learned your lesson very quickly. You paid off that
Mm-hmm.
debt.
Mm-hmm.
you know, and karma is not about punishment. It's about we choose when our karma is going to ripen. It's about learning a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And so we choose, what I also talk about in the book is the time between lives. It's kind of a processing time where you're processing what took place in this life, and what your next life, the shape, the foundation for your next, the blueprint really for your next life, and what the karmic patterns, which karmic patterns you're going to work out. I mean, all that happens at a soul level.
Mm-hmm.
So what I learned, I mean, there are many things that I learned from this whole experience, but one of them was that we are the shapers of our own destiny. There's
Right.
no there's no objective force out there that's punishing us. We are ourselves shaping our path of when we need to learn certain lessons. And if that's true, if our past has shaped our present is shaping our future.
Right.
So to live more consciously of what we want our future to look like.
So the people I've talked to who are mediums or other people who focus on a lot of past life, and for the person who asks like, hey, how can I do this? There are people who have processes and meditations. I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but if you look on my website, Fire It Up with CJ, and just put soul contract, past life, you'll find some of those ways of getting. Even though I know that you have a specific way, and every person has a meditation that gets them to one place. There are techniques out there. But having said that, when I've talked to people, they've said a lot of the similar things that you've said, which is that after we pass, we have a light. And I want to hear your perspective to add anything to it. But I heard when we pass, there's a life review in which we go to school after we die about kind of reviewing our entire lives and what we learned about it. And then, in fact, what we do is we have like a contract, some type of deal that says, here are the various things you can work on in your next life. Like here are the things, option A, B, C, D, whatever. You pick the thing like, okay, like for my lifetime, I feel like right now, one of my karmic patterns is actually devoting myself to family. Devotion is something that was part of my contract in this lifetime, and that I come in and I bring either to me or situations in which I have to be devoted. And so to me that's like a soul contract as I understand it, and there are people in my lives that are helping me with this particular karmic pattern. So this is my understanding of talking to other people, but based on your own experience, how does that fit or not fit?
It does fit. I would describe it like this. That you go into a period of review, seeing it from a different perspective, sort of, I
Hmm.
would say.
You mean a life review from a different
I want to
perspective?
position it like a school,
Yes.
but you have a different perspective, and you're looking back and seeing the things that took place, seeing unfinished things, seeing things that had come to completion. And then there are beings there who are your helpers. I mean, I have a very distinct um, relationship with a being in that world who I meet every time, who is a beloved, and he doesn't reincarnate anymore, but he's a helper, and he's helped me in a lot of my work. And then there's a period of you're moving from the review stage into the blueprint stage.
Hmm.
And these are the things I know for me, because I couldn't fulfill my aspiration to really come study with my teacher. My aspiration was to get on the path as early as possible and to get the
Oh,
teachings. And
interesting.
then in this life, I've had so much outer activity, conference organizing, dialogues, and I keep saying, when am I going to get to my ashram? When's it going to be time? That's my
That is your
aspiration.
ashram. Yeah, exactly. Interesting. So interesting. So, here's the thing I'm getting from you is, hey, in this lifetime, you don't have to die and have a life review. In this lifetime, this is what I'm hearing that you've done is you've gotten these past lives, you start seeing these seven sequential lives and saying, well, in this lifetime, why don't I look at the patterns? I don't have to get to the life review. I can learn within this lifetime what I'm. So is that what I'm? Is that what you're?
Well,
How you work it?
I think that one can do some of that work before dying, for sure. You can do some of that work, and the more you can step back from your life and um, look at the themes that have emerged, and see, you can know where there's completion and where there's not completion.
Mm.
Um, and I find myself almost as much in the future now as in the past,
Mm.
because there's going to be so much work to do on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
I hear people who say they just want to, finish it all and be out, and I say, how can you? There's so much need here for love and for compassion and for people who have some knowledge that this is not the time to jump ship. you
Right.
know so I think a lot about what's going to be needed for the future, and how, because we're at the transition point where a whole new civilization needs to be shaped.
Mm-hmm.
Things are breaking down. The systems that we've had in place for the past few hundred years are not working anymore.
Mm.
And so systems that maybe reflect a higher consciousness have to emerge, and that's going to take the work, the thinking, the visioning of a lot of people. So I find myself in that stage and talking to a lot of younger people about the whole visioning process.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that you move from a point of just looking at your individual karma and your individual work more to the collective.
Mm. Okay.
What's our collective karma as a nation, as a species?
Mm.
Because it works at that level too.
Okay, so help me understand for your own learning about your themes throughout, the last 7 lifetimes. What are the themes that have emerged? I definitely hear like helping girls is something that kind of is continues or so what are the themes and how have they moved from the individual to the collective?
So there are two major themes that I've seen. One of them is not just helping girls, but finding my own voice, spiritual voice as a woman.
Mm.
I had one life in Persia, where I was the only child of a Sufi father, a daughter.
Mm.
Uh, a mother died, no other children. It was just the two of us, and I continually felt inadequate.
Mm.
And kept thinking he had wished he had a son,
Mm.
even though he kept trying to get into my head that was just an imagined thing, and that
Mm-hmm.
a woman can achieve the same thing as a man. But I saw that theme, and then sometime later in Africa, when I found that woman shaman, that was the life where I saw a woman fulfill her full spiritual potential.
Mm.
And so when I
Mm-hmm.
saw these things, I said, oh my God, and here it is. I founded this Global Peace Initiative of Women, which is a platform for women spiritual leaders to have a greater voice globally. You know,
Mm.
that's
I
the
see.
culmination of many efforts of trying to find my own voice,
Right.
and then trying to find that full spiritual potential in a woman.
Mm.
Because when I entered the interfaith world 20 years ago, women were absent completely. Sometimes it'd be one token woman on a panel of 10 men.
Mm.
And the women would
That's
be,
awful.
not wanting to say anything. And I kept saying to, my representing my whole gender, half the human race, I'm the only woman on this panel. It was a huge struggle,
Yeah.
actually, 20 years ago when I started to try to bring this issue up.
Mm.
And so I see that now as the other theme that I've seen is bridging cultures. In one life, I was married for a Hindu during the Islamic invasions, married to a Muslim, one of the sheikhs. And that was a struggle to try to bridge those two cultures. Another life in Japan, I developed a whole kind of peace arts fair to try to bridge the warring clans. And so I saw that I found myself in these opportunities, not by choice, but by marriage mostly, where born in one clan, married into another, and had to find a way to bridge the two opposing sides.
Mm.
So then I said, okay, here I am trying to bring Palestinian and Israelis together, and Afghan. I mean, this is for the
This
last
in this
20
lifetime, yeah.
in this lifetime. I've been doing a lot of these dialogues in conflict places, and so I thought, wow, this started hundreds of years ago
Right.
that I started this work. And I feel that work has come to completion. I feel that I've kind of moved on. That's something that it's been. I've done the most that I can in that area.
Mm. So you've
I'm
had
ready.
throughout history, throughout lifetimes, you've actually had this kind of similar theme, and this is the part that you were saying earlier. You kind of are finding the themes and saying, "Am I complete or am I not?" And there's a felt sense of like, "I'm complete. I've done as much as I can. Now to the next theme, whatever that may be." Is
Well,
that right?
yeah, it's like, is this the best way that I can help humanity now? I've done this, I've done this, and I'm ready to now really look and see how can I provide a deeper help to the situation that we're facing. And I think there's several themes that are emerging now for
Mm,
me.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I have to see whether I've tapped them somewhere in the past. As I said, it's an ongoing journey.
So let me give me an example of a future. Are you okay with sharing your future theme? Like an example of a future theme that
Well,
you have?
yes. I mean, I'm feeling increasingly, and this is coming from my memories of ancient India, actually. In India, in the Eastern tradition, there is this concept of time being cyclical, not linear, yugas, and that there were higher yugas, and we're now emerging from a lower consciousness, but emerging, so in an upward swing. And I've wondered, well, what would it like to be living in a time of a higher consciousness?
Mm.
How would society look? And what I've seen, and this is a theme that is emerging for me because I think this is absolutely one of the calls of the moment, is to live in a much greater harmony with the natural world.
Mm.
To see that the natural world as part of oneself, not as separate.
Ah, okay, which is a lot of the work that you're starting to do with environmentalism
Right.
and starting the dialogue. So that's one where you're like, oh, is that something that just manifested naturally or something that you're trying to make happen?
It manifested naturally.
Interesting. So your new work, kind of new theme, kind of you can see the new themes kind of emerging, and okay, this has happened. It's not something you have to go do. What's my next theme? Check, check. It's not like that.
Began working in some of our dialogues, we began to bring in some indigenous leaders, Native American,
Oh, wow,
and they
beautiful.
began talking like this. And they said, "Well, this is our indigenous wisdom," as if
Mm.
nobody had it. And I said, "Well, wait a second. We had the same understanding in ancient India." And then I said to myself, "Well, how do you know that, Dina?" I know. And then things started to emerge, and I said, yes, in the we see history. You move from the Bronze Age, Iron Age, the Bronze Age. First, they just use basic tools, and then they start agriculture. Well, maybe it was different. Maybe they didn't need those things at that time. Maybe they didn't
Mm.
need agriculture because there was such plenty in the forests
Right.
and wild foods. And I began thinking, in living in greater harmony with nature, nature also responds. It's only when you separate yourself and view nature as a commodity, a thing that we control, that you run into trouble.
Yeah,
So,
I love it. Instead of human unity, it's like unity of all. I love it. So, we've been talking to Dina Miram about her book, My Journey Through Time. Would you hold your book up again?
yes.
Excellent. I just find your whole analysis fascinating. And your website is Global Peace Initiative of Women of Women Initiative of Women. So that's Global Peace Initiative of Women, and the website URL is G for Global Peace PIW.org.
GPIW.
GPIW.org. Thank you so much for being here. I really
Oh, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
I really enjoyed it. It's been wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.